Good? Kamishibai no hajimari, hajimari. Kamishibai is about to begin, so please find a seat. I want to welcome all of you to this very exciting event for us. We actually tried to do this 5 years ago, and we got the funding and everything was in order, and then COVID came around. So I have had the pleasure to meet many of you on Zoom over the intervening years, and it's so fun to meet you in person and to welcome new people as well. So we'll have time for discussion and conversation in the course of the day. My name is Tara McGowan, and I am going to introduce the history of Kamishibai a little bit before we have our invited presenters from Japan and Peru. We're very excited with the lineup of presenters we have. They're just all fantastic and very different, so you're in for a treat. But first, I thought I would give you some introduction to how Kamishibai came about, what it is. Kami, as many of you may know from the word origami, which means folded paper, kami, means paper, and shibai is theater. So Kamishibai, paper theater. And you can see here that the storytellers on the streets of Tokyo would have a bicycle and a box with candy in it and a stage on the back, and they went from neighborhood to neighborhood telling stories and calling the children with these or various other kinds of gongs and noisemakers to come every day to the street corner to hear stories. So many people start with that history of Kamishibai, but I actually like to go back a little farther because I think it's really helpful, and I actually do this with the students and children of all ages, give them a sense of how Kamishibai came about. Whoops, I think I lost, there we go. Because that gives you an idea of how it's a kind of animation. So I often describe Kamishibai as movies in miniature. It's much more related to movies than to picture books. So I go back actually to the Edo period. Those are the dates. It was a long period when Japan was actually cut off from the rest of the world, pretty much. And around 1800, they think maybe through the island of Dejima, where Japan had some trade with the Dutch, there might have been a diagram of a magic lantern that came from Europe and entered Japan. So they came up with a very unique magic lantern that is very different from the Western-style magic lantern, and they called it utsushie, or projected pictures. So as you can see here, the utsushie performer could actually hold the lantern on his shoulder. So that was very different from Western-style heavy lanterns that were on the table. He could move around the room, and they had glass slides, like you can see at the bottom here, that's very much like a short film strip. And they would push that in front of a light source quickly, and it looked like they were moving. So you can see here how the setup, they would have many lanterns, some for the background that would stay still, and some that the performers would move around and manipulate. So this is known as Japan's first form of animation. And I love this as a print from 1829 by Utagawa Kuniyoshi. This is how children would have enjoyed utsushie performances. It was actually in a very dark room, but the children are in front and the screen is in front of them, and the projectors are behind the screen. So they didn't see the projectors, they just saw these magical, light-filled, animated beings appear in front of them. So it's very much like a movie already in the 1820s. So around 1850, this guy named Shin-san, who was actually illustrating the slides, thought, if I do this on paper with a black background, I can perform this outside without all that heavy equipment. So he came up with this puppet called tachie. It was later called tachie, or standing puppets, to differentiate it from the Kamishibai we'll perform today. But he called it the new utsushie, the new magic lantern show. But the people who came to his performances said, that's paper and theater, so we're going to call it Kamishibai. And this is the first Kamishibai. So this form of Kamishibai lasted for a long time, way after the newer form came around. This is a toy Kamishibai set I found at the Coats and Children's Library. They're very tiny on one sheet of paper so the children could make them and perform them at home. And it's the story of Sarutobi Sasuke. So I made some examples, actually copied them, and you can see how complicated this was to perform. So we have Sarutobi Sasuke here, and it would be performed in front of a dark curtain. And so whoops, I have them in the wrong direction. The Okami wolf goes, as he's approaching him, and then, yeah, he jumps, and Sarutobi Sasuke draws his sword and cuts the wolf in half, and he dies. Okay, so you had to be able to perform with many different puppets, and as you saw in that stage, it was hard to see them, and they came up with various ways to try to make it easier. Okay, so here you can see he actually takes on many different monsters, but you can see how it's almost exactly like the Utsushie performance. You have some of the puppets were for the scenery setting, and then these were the movable ones that you moved quickly to give a sense of animation, very much like the slides. Whoops. Is that right? Okay. Yeah, so around the early 1900s, around 1910, silent film came to Japan. And of course, it was black and white, and many of the films were foreign. So they had what were called benshi, or movie explainers. And this guy on the right, your left, is doing the maesetsu, or the explanation before the movie. And this woman here is actually narrating the movie as it happens. So these guys were very popular. Some of them were even more popular than the movie actors, and they were very good at storytelling. So the street performance artists saw this form of storytelling and thought, we'll do that on the streets in a miniature format. And so the tachi, or the Kamishibai performers, some of the puppets actually were of foreign films too. I read about a guy who'd made Charlie Chaplin's The Kid and those kind of puppets. But in 1930, these guys came up with a different form that we use today, which is called hirae, or flat pictures. And as you can see, they were even better than the movies in some ways because they were bright colors. And the storytellers would use the same vocal style as the movie narrators. And this was the street performance art of Kamishibai from about 1930 to, well, it sort of started to die out in the 60s, then after television came. This guy actually, he passed away recently, but he was doing street performance art in Osaka in 2012 when I took this picture, and he has it on the back of his motorcycle. So there were lots of adaptations. But this character here, Ogonbato, is the most famous Kamishibai character. If you say Kamishibai in Japan, people say Ogonbato. It's very closely connected. And he was actually the first caped superhero. He looks like a bad guy, but he's actually working for good and appears in the last minute just like Superman. But he was actually invented 7 years before Superman. So people who are into the history of comic books say Japan, came up with this first. And also he was the predecessor of many of the masked heroes that you see in Japanese anime today. So very soon after that kind of Kamishibai hit the streets, it was hugely popular because of the earlier form of Kamishibai. They already had an audience and a system in place. So overnight, it was a huge success. And this woman, Imai Yone, came from America where she'd been studying, and she was a missionary. She wanted to start a Bible school in Tokyo. And no sooner did she get her students in front of her and she started doing the Bible study, then they heard the Yoshigi clappers and knew the Kamishibai man was out there, and they all disappeared. So she followed her students out, like, what is this? She'd never heard of Kamishibai, of course, because she had been away. And she just thought, this is an amazing way to tell stories. So she started to actually ask street performance artists to create the Bible stories. So you have here very dramatic versions of the life of Jesus and biblical tales of Abraham, and she started publishing them. So very early, almost immediately after this form of Kamishibai was developed, more and more people wanted to use it in religious and educational settings. And they just realized that the students were mesmerized by it, and it was a great way to teach a lot of different things. Now, what a lot of people don't know, even in Japan, is there's a close connection between Kamishibai and Magic Lantern, even at this point. Because when Japan opened to the West, they actually sent people to the West to learn about how to use Western-style magic lanterns and use them in education. So what's interesting is that they didn't even recognize the connection between utsushie, which is a popular form of entertainment, and gento, which was the Western-style magic lantern, which was used almost exclusively in educational settings. But because Kamishibai entered educational settings, then the two of these medium started to really relate to each other. So this is a wonderful series by Takahashi Gozan, who's one of the huge figures in educational Kamishibai. He was part of an organization called the Magic Lantern Kamishibai Association, and you can see, it's a little light, but these cards are actually made to look like magic lanterns, the way the light and shadow is used. It's like coming through glass slides. And there were also, this might be a little hard to see, but these are glass slides for magic lantern shows of Kamishibai. And these were used during the war for propaganda. So this is a propaganda story. You can see that each of the cards is numbered, and they could project this on huge screens for lots of troops. So they had Kamishibai for the troops. And it's actually 12 cards, just like a published Kamishibai. So these are known as Kamishibai Gento, or Magic Lantern Kamishibai. So I should just mention, it's funny, there are actually books in the 1950s when audiovisual education was really big in Japan, where people kept saying, people think Kamishibai and Magic Lantern are the same, but we have to keep them separate. They have different qualities. But I argue that, today Kamishibai continues to draw on techniques from film and Magic Lantern shows, and I think the most interesting Kamishibai out there still are aware of that history and use the animation techniques. So these are a few stories I'm not going to tell today, but I just want you to be aware of, and if you're looking for Kamishibai to get, these are some of my recommendations, and I think Walter has all of them through Kamishibai for Kids in English. This is one of my favorite stories, Watanabe Kyoko, who I got to work with. She has many beautiful cat stories. But in this one, you can see where she's using light and shadow and just very similar to Magic Lantern ways. They're almost glowing. And the cat is looking at the moon, but we are facing the moon with him. So we really look from his perspective. And throughout the story, until a certain climactic moment, we are from his perspective, and then suddenly he faces us. And that's very dramatic. So I use this story often to teach students about perspective. Here we're chasing after him, and we actually say, come on, Yaon, you can do it. You can catch the moon, but the moon is running away too. So the direction of the card as it's pulled out of the stage looks like the cat is chasing after the moon. So these are some important techniques when you're creating your own stories. Another important kind of film-related and Magic Lantern-related technique is the partial pulling of the card. So here we have the little 1-inch boy. He's just gotten into the boat, and he's setting off from shore, and you have half of the card pulled, and then you pull the rest of the card, and suddenly out of nowhere, a huge catfish swims up to him. So if you pulled that card all the way out, it would look like, the catfish was just swimming around. But when you do it suddenly, it's like he appears out of nowhere. So that's a very effective technique. Wonderful story, Hats for Jizzos. It's about the New Year's, and this old man is running down the street trying to sell some cloth, and he's not paying attention to where he's going, and when you pull the card quickly out of the stage, boom, he runs into another man. So that's really a technique that's exactly like these, only on a larger scale, and it's the quickness of the movement that gives you the animation. Also, I wrote a subjective motion in the background. This is something in Japanese comics, too, where you have the movement actually illustrated in the background. So you're kind of subjective in the sense that you feel what the characters are feeling. They're not moving, but their background is, so you're kind of moving with them. This is a wonderful example from film where you zoom in and zoom out. Especially for climactic moments, you want to zoom in so the audience feels the emotional emotionally charged moment in the story. So here the ghost is reaching up the tree, gets closer and closer, and she grabs his ankle, and oh, her hand was cold. So that's the most emotionally charged moment in the story, and you can see how he zooms in closer and closer for that moment. So this is a great story to use to illustrate that film technique. So I argue in my books, and I think Walter has some available here, that Kamishibai is useful for teaching a lot of different things, but I think it's uniquely good at teaching one particular thing, and that's difficult to teach in other ways, and that is to build suspense up to a climax in a story. So this is probably familiar to everybody, this kind of structural diagram for narrative, but Takahashi Gozan, who I mentioned earlier, I copied this from one of his diagrams. And so the card sequence, just one card after another, may be at the bottom, but how do you build these peaks up to that exciting moment? And that's done through the different kinds of card pulling techniques that I just shared with you. So I'd like a little helping. I'll share some stories that I use with students to teach some of these techniques. Can you all see? Oh, that's as far as the cord will go. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so as you notice with this, there are these peaks that lead up to the climax, and then there's usually a resolution of some sort. But as I just explained to you with the street performance art, well, maybe I didn't explain, but I think many of you know that they sold candy. And they wanted to get the kids to come back every day to buy more candy. So this kind of format was uniquely good at getting kids to get really into the story. And then right at that climactic moment, they would say, to come back tomorrow, to be continued. And they would do that over and over for like hundreds of episodes, okay? So this is something that, whoops, I have to be on this side. I hope this doesn't interfere. I can darken it if it's too much. So this is a story that I made that's sort of more of a teaching tool, but I get the children to help me tell the story. So I'm going to ask you to help me tell this story. And it's a way to help them understand story structure, because I don't know if this has happened to you, but some of my students come up to me after they've done 2 cards and say, I'm done, I'm finished. And instead of saying, well, I don't think you are, and trying to explain why, I just made this story to demonstrate to them what happens when you make a short story too short. So, because Kamishibai is like a movie, sound effects and dialogue are much more important than narration. So since English has so little in terms of sound effects, I have the kids come up with some sound effects as they're looking at what's happening. So can you make a sound effect for this? Okay, and then when it opens, what sound will you make? Okay, let's do that. So it's cracking, and oh, okay, and he is a little dinosaur, so what sound would he make? He turns around. What's behind him? What sound does that make? Okay, what happens next? Chop, 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 chop. Oh, okay. So then my students are like, that's a horrible story. That's the worst story I've ever heard, right? I said, what's wrong with it? Well, if you look back at this diagram, it's like he only made it this far and then suddenly, right, it's all over. So I said, okay, we need a few peaks in there. We need to get up to some sort of climax. So let's take this terrible card out and start again. Okay, here it goes. It's out. All right, now you know how to tell the story, so I'm relying on you. Here we go. And up. And okay, what's next? Yeah! what's happening here? Thwop, 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 thwop. And so you can see here, I zoomed in on this moment, and when I zoom out, you have a different perspective. So I could have just stopped the story here and said, come back tomorrow and find out what happened to Struthio, but we are going to continue. Thwop, 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 and what's that? Chomp, 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 chomp. Ah, bonk. Do you want to come back tomorrow? Yeah. Are you ready? All right, this is something that's hard to say in English. Koro koro, right? In Japanese, you say koro 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 koro. They have a word for rolling. Koro 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 koro, bonk. And koro 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 and bang. All right, so is this a carnivore? Do you think he's in danger now? No, this is a sweet triceratops, and she carries him home, pew, 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 to his family. And so this is one day in the life of Struthio. Thank you. Thank you. You have to just clap for yourselves. Yep. So you can see how it's easy to make episodes and just keep it going. I can have day 2 in the life of Struthio, and you'll all be exhausted. So the Ogombat story, I shouldn't leave that in the front. The Ogombat story went on for hundreds and hundreds of episodes. And when television came to Japan, everybody knew Kamishibai so well that they called television Denki Kamishibai, or electric Kamishibai, because it was sort of the same thing. And some of the stories from Kamishibai became popular television anime shows, like Ogombato was actually a television show. I think Pepe saw it in Peru, he mentioned. Okay, how am I doing for time? Because I do have a few more things to share. 10:30. Oh, good, I have lots of time. Great. Okay, so another sort of little known fact about the Kamishibai storytellers is they didn't just tell one story. They would tell what were called katsugeki, or really adventure hero stories like Ogombato here. And often Ogombato, stuck together maybe, would be fighting monsters. Oops, where'd the monster card go? Here we go. So like Godzilla came from Japan, sort of came out of this culture of the hero fighting. This is a tank monster that has stolen the little girl. So he comes in the last moment to save her. Another popular genre were sentimental stories, usually about girls who were mistreated by their stepmothers and orphaned or something like that. So they called these namida chodai-mono, or tearjerkers, we would call them. And then a third genre, which is kind of interesting, was called manga kamishibai, little manga or cartoon kamishibai for the very little children. And these were also in episodes. This is called Ichini no Sanchan. And it's a facsimile I made of an actual street performance card set from Coats and Children's Library. What I want to show you, if I can get to the last card, I copied what it looks like on the back of the card. It's handwritten, hand done. So these early cards were all hand done and covered with nisu, or like a lacquer, to protect them from the rain. So they had an amazing system of renting out parts of the stories so that one hand-painted story could be disseminated to many people. But in between these stories, they would give the children opportunities to win more candy through various kinds of quizzes. And so it was actually incredibly educational, even though it wasn't necessarily meant for education. they would have rebus quizzes. And with Japanese, you can come up with so many fun visual verbal puns because of the Chinese characters and different writing syllabary. But basically, they're similar to what we have here known as rebus quizzes. So if you have a tie plus a girl minus the L is tiger. So whoever answered that first would get more candy. All right, here's a slightly more difficult one. A toaster, everyone's too good. All right, ding. Yeah, old style toaster. I'm also teaching children about history here. All right, and this is more complicated. I did this with 5th graders yesterday. They took a little while. Alarm clock, exactly, and this is really old style. Bring! Probably none of the 5th graders had even seen one of these. Yeah, so then they could get more candy in between each of the stories. So it was really not just one story, you know, and then they'd go on to the next. It was really like an event every day where they got to hear a little bit more of all of the stories. Okay. So I'll just quickly share with you, whoops. So I've created various stories just to teach children about the techniques of Kamishibai. These kind of shikake or movable Kamishibai are always popular. So this story I've called, let me get out the other story so I don't get confused here. The Great Snake Mistake. This is a very simple story that I use to teach the idea that the cards need to be seen from far away, so you want to have nice outlining. You have to think about the direction of the cards, and also the character needs to be recognizable. So, the Great Snake Mistake. Not too long ago, there lived a giant snake. He was so huge and magnificent that he went around to everybody boasting, "I am the biggest, the most magnificent, the most incredible snake in the whole world." But he wasn't really sure. So he went out on a voyage to find out. So where's this? The Great Wall. So you knew that right away, right? So if you add details like landscape or you want to have a certain country in mind, you have to have the audience recognize it right away because they won't get to see it very long. All right, he went over the land, he went over the sea. But one day, he saw a snake that looked just like him. What did he do? Gaboom! He bit down. You can see I zoomed in there. Only to discover that he was the biggest snake in the whole world. So when you zoom out again, you get a whole different perspective. So because I make stories like this and sometimes do shorter workshops with kids, I thought I'd quickly share a story that one of my students made in a rather short workshop. So it's kind of stick figures, but he's completely mastered how to build up to a climax. So this story is The Ghost by Tom Piringer. Now you can notice something right away that he did wrong. Exactly. When you move this car, it's going backwards. Brum, 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 brum. And then he did it again, and it was backwards again. So he decided, I'm just going to use this as my title page and pull it out quickly. So, The Ghost. One night, a man was driving along, brum, 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 and he didn't know where he was. He got lost. And as he went along, it got darker and darker. And finally, he came to a house. So he went up to the door, and he knocked, ton, 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 but there was no answer. But he found the door was open, and he did what you should probably never do. He went inside, and, oh no, what was that? A ghost! He ran into the corner. That was not a good idea. And the ghost came closer and closer, when suddenly, what did he see? A light switch. Ka-ching! Meh, meh. It was a sheep. Okay, so even though it was very simple and he did it in a very short time, it has all the elements that we talked about. Okay, I hope I have time for one last story. So, because I am particularly interested in the history of Kamishibai, and I don't know if you got the handout that I have, but there are handouts for you with my email and also my website, because I have a blog about the history if you're interested in reading more about it. But I decided there were so many great examples of magic lantern Kamishibai and Kamishibai magic lanterns that I would try to make my own. And this one is actually based on, I went to a wonderful show of the Edo period slides. So the characters in this story are based on what you would see in the Edo period, painted on glass slides, but I made up the story. And of course, they wouldn't move this way because this is the newer form of Kamishibai. But it's called Dream Eater, a magic lantern Kamishibai by Tara McGowan. Mukashi mukashi. A long time ago, there lived a lord and a lady. They lived in a huge castle, and they loved each other very much. But there was one thing they didn't have, they wanted more than anything else in the world. Can you guess what that was? Of course, a child of their own. And so they prayed to the gods, Kami-sama, Kami-sama, please send us a child of our own. And finally, they were blessed with a little girl. She was so lovely and full of joy that they called her Akari Hime, or the Light Princess. Well, Akari Hime was joyful during the day, but at night it was a different story. One night when she was sleeping in her bed, suddenly, nyuru, 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 zaboon, 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 the sound of waves and sea monsters. Yeah! She screamed. And very quickly, if I can get the card out, her parents came running. Akari Hime, are you okay? Are you ill? Akari Hime, what happened? Her father said. Oh, mother, father, I had the most horrible dream. If it's only a dream, you'll be okay. Go back to sleep, her father said. You'll be all right, Akari. Just go back to sleep, her mother said too. Well, she went back to sleep. But no sooner did she fall asleep than za, za, za. This time she heard the sound of fire, and zun, zun, zun. Into the room came Oni demons from the underworld. Chia! She screamed again. But this time nobody came because she was having bad dreams every night, and they were too tired to come to her aid. Well, night after night, she had bad dreams. And so finally she couldn't sleep. She just walked through the halls of the castle and getting thinner and thinner and paler. And one night, boom, 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 into the castle blew a piece of paper with something on it. Well, Akari Hime caught it in her hands. And what was there? The strangest creature she had ever seen. It had a trunk like an elephant and a mane like a lion. What is it? She thought to herself. And as if it could hear her thoughts, the little creature said, Baku, 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 I am a Baku. You put me under your pillow and I can help you. Well, Akari Hime put the Baku under her pillow and she fell asleep. No sooner did she fall asleep than you can imagine what started to happen. She heard zaboon, 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 nyuru, 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 and in came the sea monsters. But Baku, 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 Paku, 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 he ate them all up. Next night came in zaboon, zaboon, nyuru, 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 sea monsters, and za, 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 the Oni demons too. But Baku, 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 Paku, 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 he ate them all up. And so after a whole week of eating Akari Hime's dreams, you can imagine that he got pretty fat and tired, so he was sleeping when, zun, 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 into the room came a real robber. This was no dream. He had come into the room to kidnap Akari Hime for ransom. He grabbed the princess, threw her into a sack, and off he went until he got to his hideout, and then he took the sack and dumped Akari Hime out onto the ground. Is that Akari Hime? No, that's the Baku. He's not looking so good. Maybe all that bouncing around wasn't good for him. The Baku got shakily up to his feet. he turned around and ghetto, 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 ghetto. He threw up all those bad dreams right toward the robber. Help, help, help. Zabun, zabun, za, za, go, go. They came after him. The horse ran away and no, stop, help me. The robber ran off too and they were never heard of again. Boom, 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 the wind blew, and now the Baku was back to his original size, and he flew over the breezes looking for some more bad dreams to eat. But the next morning, Akari Hime woke up in the sunshine and took a walk in the garden with her parents. They lived happily ever after. Oshimai. Thank you. Thank you. So you can see, too, it's fun to work with light and shadow in different ways, even when you're working with paper. There are lots of ways to do that. So I think I'm out of time, and I want to introduce, yes, our next speaker will be Bun-chan, Fumiko Araki. We're very excited to have her here. She's been one of the organizers of the World Kamishibai Forum from the beginning, and I know she has a few things to set up, so while she does that, I will... So Bun-chan is also a famous puppeteer in Japan. She makes wonderful hand puppets, and she's very funny, but she keeps her kamishibai and puppetry separate. So she gave an interesting talk about that in some of our workshops. So どうぞ。はい、準備してください。あ、はい。じゃあちょっとこれを幕紙先に入れる？